Hello. Hello.
Hello.
So you should be able to hear me. If you want to go ahead and ask questions directly, I suppose you could ask through Piazza, but go ahead and use the chat feature on YouTube. Okay, so mostly it's just going to be an open office hour here. If you've got questions, go ahead and ask. If there are no, go ahead and ask through the chat over here. If you don't have any specific questions, then I've got assignments from previous semesters. One of them's a data projection problem, where we read a bunch of metadata, comma-separated values from a file, and then we have to produce reports about it. For each publisher, how many games did they publish in that data, and for each platform, how many, or for each game, how many platforms is it available on. So if there are no questions, I would begin with that. Or we have another one, let's see, that's a little bit easier to start out with, isotope half-life, where you read in information about a radioactive isotope, for example, strontium-90, including an initial mass in grams. And then you have to produce a report that after so many years, you are left with half as much as before. And each year up until that point, how much of the radioactive material is still there. So, but first, I'll go ahead and open it up to questions. If not, I'll go ahead and begin with the isotope problem. Note that I do think that this is being recorded and will be made available later as well. So if you, and I don't know whether or not live you can fast forward or rewind and fast forward back to the live broadcast, but that's probably also an option. So let's go ahead and start with the half-life problem here then. I'm going to write first a PHP script to do this, and then an equivalent JavaScript program, or Java program to do this. We're going to want to read in these 5 things from the user, and what we're going to do, the way that we're going to do that is we're going to use command line arguments. So let me go ahead and start a PHP script here. I'm not using REPL on this because eventually I'm going to want to do command line arguments, and I'm also going to want to do file IO probably on the next problem. So REPL does not allow me to do that. But if we have need to answer any questions, then I can jump back to REPL and do that. Remember that PHP scripts always begin with the PHP tag. And we can also check for command line arguments using argv and argc, just like in C. So I can check if argc is not equal to the number of arguments that we expect, then we can go ahead and echo an error message. Where we plan to read in the atomic number, the element name, the element symbol, the half-life of the element in years, and the initial mass. So and we can exit from a PHP script using the traditional exit function from C here. The 1 is simply an exit error code indicating an error. By convention, 0 is no error, and any non-zero value indicates an error. So how many command line arguments do we actually want here in PHP? Well, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But in PHP, the first command line argument, like in C, is always the script name. In this case, half-life.php. So we actually need to check whether or not we've got 6 command line arguments. Once we know that there are 6 command line arguments, we can start using them. For example, atomic number is equal to argv sub 1. That's the first user-supplied command line argument. It's actually the second command line argument. Argv sub 0 would be the script name. H, the half-life, is going to be a floating point number. So let's go ahead and automatically convert that. at this point, we've read in all of these values using command line arguments. Let's go ahead and start by printing out the information here just to make sure that everything is working. Doesn't matter if we match that exactly, but I do want to know whether or not we read in everything from the user. We could always come back and change it if we want to. You can use print, you can use echo. I prefer to use printf because it allows us to do formatting. %s is a placeholder for a string. That'll be the element name. We'll end the line, and I'm going to print out the element name, the element symbol, and I guess we wanted also the atomic number, and then the element symbol. Not going to be exactly the same, but will do. Go ahead and also print out the half-life. That's a floating point number, so the placeholder is %f. And let's also go ahead and print out the mass. Let me move this over so I can see the chat. Everything good so far? Okay, then let's go ahead and test this script. I'm going to invoke it from the command line, and I'm going to pass in the numbers, the numbers that are suggested here in the handout. For example, here, 38 is our atomic number, strontium 90. Oops. SR is the symbol, 28.9 years as a half-life, and suppose that we start out with 10 grams. And it looks like we read in everything correctly from the command line arguments. The half-life is 28.9 years, and the initial mass is 10 grams. We could of course add more information there, but you can always. I'll post this code later on if you really want. You can always play with the details yourself if you want to. All right, going back to the statement here. We're obviously going to need to write some sort of a loop here, because an initial mass of 10 grams here, we're going to as for each year that passes, it's going to go down a little bit based on this formula up here. After y years, with a half-life of h, where c is a constant depicted here, and an initial mass of m, after so many years, after y years, we're going to have so much left over. So let's go ahead and, as a first step here, let's go ahead and figure out this constant here. All right. Now, obviously, we wouldn't want e to the. That's not going to work. Instead, there's a standard mathematical math library function x that allows us to compute e to whatever given value is given in the function here. So I've got my constant there. I could define that as a global constant if you really wanted to. But otherwise, now let's go ahead and just start with our loop. To start, I'm going to have a current mass, which is initialized to the initial mass. And that enables me to create a while loop here based on that current mass. While the current mass is greater than or equal to 1/2 of the initial mass, we keep going. So we also need a counter, I guess, for a year. I'll just go ahead and use y here. And initially, it's going to be 0. Right? What happens to this equation when y is 0? Well, anything raised to the 0 is going to be 1, so we're left with m. And we can immediately print that out. Printf, %d will be for integers. And then we can tab over, or I'll just put in 2 spaces. And we're going to print out the current mass, %f, and then end line. And we're going to want to print the year and the current mass. Now for the next loop, we're going to want to update the current mass based on this formula up here. Simply going to be the initial mass times c raised to the y divided by h. So we can use the math function pow to do that. C raised to the power y divided by the half-life here was lowercase h. Now we need to be careful here because the next iteration will want year 1 instead of year 0. So after we print it out, we'll go ahead and increment our y value. Right. Go ahead and see what this does. I'll put in the same numbers as before. Oops. We do have an error here on line 18. Let's see. See what was that parse error? Okay, it was probably just a cut and paste error from when I cut and pasted from the PDF. There was probably some invalid hidden characters in there. So it looks kind of like our output over here. Let me go ahead and bring it up over here. We start out with 10 grams and then 9.76. This is more accurate. I'm printing out more accurate decimal places. That's fine. When you are going to actually hand something in on the grader, if you echo out more information or better formatted information, that's perfectly fine too. What's not fine though here is that it appears that we're not going as far as we should have been, right? So something that we can do to fix that would be to go one more iteration here, right? We print it out and then we set ourselves up for the next iteration. So once we've broken out of this while loop, we can simply just print once more, and that's what I'll do. Go ahead and run that again. And now I'm essentially getting the same answer here. It goes until it's less than 50% of what it used to be. We start out with 10 grams, and then by year 29, which makes sense because strong TM90 here has a half-life of 28.9 years, we'll have less than 5 grams remaining. Okay. And once again, here is that program in its entirety. I can go ahead and post that later on to GIST if you really want to. Before we go on to the next exercise, though, which again is going to be some file I/O processing, so file input. Suppose that we have a file of this form, and how do we process that file? Are there any questions? Actually, before we do that, let's go ahead and translate this program. I'll keep it up over here to Java. Here I've got hello world, so let me go ahead and close that. And I'm going to create a new class called half-life. And create a public static void main string args. And we're going to go ahead and translate this program that we just wrote over here into Java. The first thing we want to do is we want to check the number of command line arguments here. One difference in Java is that the first argument is not the script or the executable file name, because we already know what that is, right? The class is basically the executable code name already. So here we have to check whether or not args.length is not equal to 5. We will be expecting 5 command line arguments out of this. Args.length, args is an array of strings, and .length is a way to get its size. So if we don't have 5 command line arguments, we'll go ahead and echo an error message. Here we can actually print to the standard error, printf, or we can use print ln, printf, whatever we want, usage, and instead of retyping everything, I'm simply going to come over here and steal all the work from before. I don't need to put in the command line or the end line character here because I'm using print ln, which will do that for me. In Java, you can exit using system.exit, very similar to the exit function method from C, or like we just did in PHP. All right, now to convert those command line arguments, right, atomic number, element name, etc., we're going to want to use something different. We can't just copy them over. If they're strings, we can just copy them over. For example, atomic number, but that's going to be an integer. So let's go with an int, atomic number. We'll treat it as a true integer here. We didn't do that in the PHP version. Integer.parseInt allows us to parse a string. Args, remember, so 0 is going to be the actual first argument here. We're going to parse that out into an integer. Now, if somebody didn't give a valid integer, then that's going to throw an exception. We can choose to catch that exception if we want to, or we could just let it be fatal to the program and kill the entire program. For simplicity, I'll keep it like this. Now, element name, that's going to be a string. So we'll just go ahead and copy it over from the second command line argument at index 0. Likewise, the element symbol will be arg sub 1, or sorry, 2. Now the half-life is going to be a double variable, so I'll keep it h here. We'll need to use the double class dot parse double as arg sub 3. And double mass, initial mass, that'll be double dot parse double arg sub 4. Okay. Now I'm going to grab everything over here just so that we can have the exact same behavior. We can't use printf. Printf is not a function. I remember in Java is an object-oriented programming language. So we need to make sure that everything is a class or belongs to a class. The printf function belongs to the system.out. The system is actually a class. Out is a static member variable of that class. It's actually a print stream. It's the standard output, right? But otherwise, we can use the exact same placeholders as before. And so, of course, our variable names will have to change here. And the atomic number is actually an integer, so we should change our placeholder to %d for an integer. H and M are as before, but again, we'll still need that system.out.printf. Now let's go ahead and compute that constant C. All right. Math functions, this is a double, sorry. Math functions are available in the math library, which is in the math class. The math class has a whole bunch of other things available to you. Math dot, for example, e and pi are both defined. Absolute value, arc, cosine, just a bunch of trigonometric functions and a bunch of standard functions, log, min, max, etc. Go ahead and also create an integer variable y and initialize it to 0 as before. And a current mass. We'll initialize that to the initial mass. And then another while loop. While the current mass is greater than or equal to half of the initial mass, we will print it out, increment our year, and then recompute the current mass. So again, system.out.printf. We will print out the year and the current mass. We'll increment y, and then we'll update the current mass to be the initial mass. Math.pow is also available in the math library. And we just need to make sure to take all of our dollar signs off of our variable names. One thing that you need to be careful about in Java, just like C, is if you take an integer and divide it by an integer, the result will be an integer. So this y divided by h here looks a little bit suspicious, but because y is an integer, but we're okay because h is a double variable. So we're okay here. This is an integer divided by a double. The result will be a double. And then finally, just one more print statement after the while loop because we set ourselves up for it. All right. I'm going to cut and paste our command line arguments here. And I'm going to describe, I think we did this in lab 1. If not, we might have done it in lab, we'll do it in lab 2. But you'll note here that that we did not get the same number of command line arguments that we expected. And so it is printing to the standard error in red that it expected these 5 command line arguments. The way that we do that is after we do an initial run, there's a drop down here. And we can go to run configurations. Under run configurations, we can provide command line arguments. You can also provide JVM arguments down here if you really want to. But for now, we'll just apply these 5 command line arguments. And when we run that, we get the exact same behavior as in PHP. So that is the first exercise in PHP and Java. I'll open it up. Any more questions before we go on? All right, this is going to look weird for a second here. I just want to make sure that everything is still broadcasting. And it looks like everything is good. Let's see. Is there a pre-lab for this? I assume that you're talking about lab 2. Lab 2 does have, I mean, every lab from now on will have stuff that you should be doing before you come to lab. Let's see. Lab 2, the handout. The handouts will always describe what you need to do before lab. So for example, here, if you're doing the Java lab, then you should read these tutorials on if-else statements, switch statements if you really want to, loops, etc. For PHP, here is the documentation for control structures. In addition, you should also be reading any stuff that we have in the lab. For example, PHP, we give you the syntax for doing a bunch of loops and a bunch of conditionals. We also talk about for each loops with respect to arrays, and then the actual activities. So you should be doing the pre-lab activities here, and then reading the lab before you come to lab. Does that answer the question? We are on like a 10-second delay here, so I'll wait for your answer. While we're waiting for any answer there. There we go, we got it. Let's go ahead and take a look at the other activity here. Let's see. So we have CSV data, that's comma separated values. For example, here, it describes a bunch of video games available that are published by certain publishers in a certain year on a certain platform. Each line contains a record of a game title, publisher, published year, and the platform separated by commas. However, the publisher may exist without any game records. Ubisoft, for example, and a game may exist without being available on any platform. Contra, for example. Let's see, where is it? Here. Contra is published by Capcom, but according to our data, it's not available on any system. Likewise, Ubisoft here has a blank game title, a blank year, and a blank system, indicating that that record is just there to indicate that the publisher exists. Okay. So we're going to have to write a PHP program and then eventually a Java program to process each file and produce two reports. A sorted list of publishers, sorted alphabetically, along with a count of the number of games that they've published, and a sorted list of games, sorted alphabetically, along with a count of the number of platforms that they're available on. In other words, we should produce a report like this. Ubisoft is here twice. We'll find out why in a second. But otherwise, it's listing all of the publishers along with the number of games that they've published. And each game is available on a certain number of platforms. Here's Lego Star Wars is available on Xbox, PlayStation 2, PC, and Mac. All right. So our first step is going to be to open up this file. And let me go ahead and cut and paste the contents of this file into gamedata.txt, let's say. So all of that is now in a file here. And we're going to want to write a PHP script to open up that file, process it line by line. And once we've got to that point, we can, for our first step here, we'll go ahead and do the publisher count. We're going to want to go through and find all the unique publishers, and then perhaps go through and again, maybe, and find all of the, or find the number of records that it corresponds to. We could do this on the fly, or we could make, a record of some sort. We could create a class in PHP that represented a game. I'm just going to keep it simple here and go iteratively. Let's first at least write some code here to process this file line by line, and then we'll come back and determine how we should process each one of those lines. I forget what we're supposed to call this, but I think it's gamereport.php. So gamereport.php. And I think that you're supposed to read in the file from the command line arguments. I'll just go ahead and hard code it now. We called it gamedata.txt. If not, we can check. Yep, gamedata.txt. Or .csv if you really want to. All right, so file I/O is pretty simple in PHP and in Java. You basically have to open the file, then you can read it line by line, and then you can close the file. And anybody coming from a C background will find this familiar. Basically, we need to use fopen, and we're going to open the file name, and we're going to open it up for a particular mode. In this case, we're going to open it up for reading, so we'd pass in R. If this were an output file, we'd open it up for writing, which would be a W. Right? This H is typically referred to as a file handle. It's basically just a reference to the file. As we read through it, that reference moves through the file content. For example, if we read 3 lines from the file, then this H is a reference to the 4th line. We don't know how many lines there are up front. So instead, we can use this nice convenient function feof to determine whether or not it's at the end of the file. So while it's not at the end of the file, we'll continue reading from it. We'll read from it line by line. And then again, this will look familiar for anybody coming from a C background. We can read a line using forgets. That just simply stands for file get string. It'll read the entire line up to and including the end line character of the file pointed to by H. Right? For now, I'm just going to make sure that it works by printing that line. And at the end, when we're done with the file, we should be good stewards of our resources. So we should close the file. And there's the end of my PHP script. Let's just go ahead and test it to see that this works. Game report.php. Oops. Oops, there's no underscore. I forgot. It's just FEOF. So we need to update that. No underscore. There we go. And print, oops, there are too few arguments. I screwed up. I didn't actually print the line. There we go. There. Now it actually works. That is indeed the contents of the file. Note here that I did not print out an endline character. That's because Forgets preserves that endline character. So if we wanted to get rid of that endline character, the line that's returned from Forgets, we could trim it. That will remove leading and trailing white space. Okay. And now when we print it out, it's all going to be printed as one giant line, which is not what we want, but at least we got rid of that endline character. If we just wanted to print it, we could, of course, restore that endline character. But I know that it works. Right? So we have each line here. What we need to do with each line, for example, in fact, let me go back and just simply cut and paste an example here. And I'll put it into the comments just so that we have a reference. We're expecting 1, 2, 3, 4 tokens. The game title, the publisher, if one exists, and the year, and the platform that it's available on. And remember, any one of these tokens may be blank, may be empty. So we have to deal with that. I'm most interested, because we're doing the first part here, counting the number of games available for each publisher. I'm most interested in the second token here. The way that you can get those tokens is by using the explode function. Let me just go to the documentation for that. PHP explode. It's kind of like the split method in Java. It's kind of like the strtoke in C. You can split a string, a given string here. Oops. You can split a given string by some delimiter. All right. And just to see how that works, let me go to a REPL here and show you how you can split this string. All right. So here's our string, and it's got, there we go. The tokens. Let's explode that string along our delimiter here. In this case, is commas. Right. We want to split those 4 things out according to the commas. And we'll split the string S. To show you that this works, I'm going to use this print. Oh, oops! It should be print R. That's print readable. It takes an array and it prints it in a nice little formatting here that you'll see in a second. Oops, tokens. Sorry. And we'll see that it's been split along this this comma delimiter here. Right? So the value at index 0 will have the game title. The value at index 1 will have the publisher, etc. So I'm going to go back to our program here and explode each line into tokens. Now again, I'm interested in that second token. So let's just go ahead and store that into a variable, tokens sub 1. And now you need to do something with it. So you might want to sit back and think to yourself, how am I actually going to count? If I've already seen this publisher, then I've seen a new game here, and so I should increment the number of game titles that publisher has published. Otherwise, if this is the first time I've seen this publisher, well, then I've seen one game, and I should go ahead and at least initialize that to 1. We can achieve this through arrays in PHP. We haven't got to it yet. We will very soon. We would have gotten to it today if the weather had been better. But arrays are basically key value mappings in PHP. There really aren't actual arrays, like static arrays that you understand them. They can be non-contiguous. In other words, I can define an element at index 0, and then the next element is at index 5. Well, what about the indices between 1, 2, 3, 4? They don't have to exist. Moreover, I can map not only integers to values, but I can map strings to values. So let me go ahead and create an array here. That's initially empty, right? What I could do is ARR sub, say, Ubisoft is equal to 0, right? The convention here is that Ubisoft is mapping to the value 0, meaning that the game publisher Ubisoft, the string, has 0 games published. How could I exploit that down here? Well, I could check to see if the publisher has already been put into this array. The way that you can do that is you can basically check to see if that string exists. And for the life of me, I don't remember what it is off the top of my head, but that's why Google is your friend. PHP array key exists. Array key exists. That's exactly what it is. So you can check to see whether or not a key, in this case Volvo, exists in a particular array, and it'll return true or false. Right? So we can check if array key exists of publisher, right? Publisher, and in the array ARR, right? And if the key already exists, we can use it, right? So we can, what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to get the old value, num games is equal to ARR sub publisher. That's the number of games that we previously saw. So let's go ahead and increment it, num games plus plus. And then we need to put it back into the array. The publisher will now map to num games. Now, there are a lot of ways that you can clean that up and make it simpler, but I wanted to show the step-by-step process here. If the array key exists for publisher, that means that we've put it in the array at some point before. Then we can pull it out with the understanding that it's going to be an integer, and then we'll increment that because we've seen a new game here, and then we'll put it back in there. Otherwise, if the array key does not exist, well, what we can do is we can put it in there. So ARR sub publisher is equal to 1, because presumably we've seen one game here. Right? There's still some problems with this, but just to understand what's going on, let's what those problems might be. Well, first of all, let's go ahead and get rid of this. That shouldn't be in there. Let's go ahead and after we've processed the entire file, let's go ahead and print out this array, array which maps a publisher to the number of games that they've published. So I can't iterate over this with a traditional for loop and an index variable because I've used a bunch of strings to map all my values. So what I need to use is a for each loop. ARR as a key value mapping. And I'll simply print them out. Printf, %s, the key is a string, the publisher name. And then the value is presumably an integer. And then we'll end the line, and the key and the value. Go ahead and test this out. Oops. I'm not sure what's going on either. So let's go ahead and print out our array at the end of all of this. And let's see what's going on. Oh. Oh, that was a cut and paste error from the REPL example. I was trying to explode, parse a string S that did not exist. And so hopefully now that'll be fixed. There we go. Lucas, we could exploit the functionality of print R here to take care of this, but I'm going to want it printed in a nicely formatted format down here, just like the handout. The handout, in fact, is even nicer, right? It prints all the columns over here and all the columns over here. So let's go ahead and fix that. Now that I know that it works, I'll go ahead and comment out that print R there. And the way that we can format this a little bit better is by putting additional placeholders in front of it. Let's just go ahead and say 35S, and we'll leave D here. Let's go ahead and align them in case there's anybody with more than 10 games, 10 or more games. What this is doing is this is printing at least 35 columns. Okay. Now, if there's a string that is longer than 35 columns, then of course it'll violate this, and it'll for that one line it'll look bad. But I think that everything was under 35 columns, so let's go ahead and test that out. Still a problem. By default, everything is justified to the right. So what I want to do instead is justify it to the left. And one trick that you can do in printf style functions is to make it into a negative. That will justify it left. 35 it looked like was an overestimate, but we'll go ahead and leave it as it is. Now, LucasArts has 6 games. Let's go ahead and check to see the expected output, which I believe is correct. Let's see, LucasArts only has 3 games. I wonder why. Oh, so we're off by 3 there, right? Likewise, let's see, where's Atari? Atari has 1 game, even though over here it has 0 games. And in fact, in the let's open up the data file here and search for Atari. Right, it actually doesn't have any games. Right, that's the only instance of Atari, and it was just there to show you that this publisher exists. There was no actual game data here. So we've already hit our first bug. How can we fix that? So we see a publisher here. We shouldn't automatically assume that game represents a valid game, right? And in either one of these cases. So what we need to do is we need to check to see that the first token, game title, is equal to tokens sub 0. We need to see that represents a valid string, that it's not just simply empty. All right. So I could put another conditional in here if tokens is not equal to the empty, or if game title is not equal to the empty string. But there's also a nice convenient function that does that for me. If it's not empty, let's see. So yeah, here, game title. There we go. So if it's not empty, then we'll go ahead and increment our counter. What if it is empty? Well, understand that if it's empty, then there's no game to add. But at this point, we've seen the publisher before because the array key exists. So we don't need to say that that there's this publisher that already exists, because we know it already exists. So this block, we're done. The block that we need to be worried about here is the else block. So we've not seen this publisher before. We don't automatically assume that there's a valid game there. But I could set it equal to 0. Right? Now we could check if it is not empty, game title. Then we could increment it. ARR sub publisher is equal to 1. Right? And let's see if that at least fixes it for Atari. And indeed it does. Now, LucasArts is still off here. Let's check our data file, game data. So LucasArts. 1, 2. Actually, no. It looks like it's off. Oh, it looks like it's correct. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Oh no, it's incorrect. So we have 6 entries here for LucasArts. But what's the problem here? 4 are the exact same game. Over here, the expected output says that LucasArts has published only 3 games, and it's actually correct that there's only 3 games that published: Lego Star Wars, TIE Fighter, and X-Wing versus TIE Fighter. Right? The first 4 are all duplicates. So we need to figure out how to handle duplicates in the game now. All right, at this point, I'm thinking that maybe we should go back and refactor this a little bit and create a way to represent each game. That is, we're going to create a class that represents each game, and that would certainly be the best solution. You could probably go back, or even just a way to keep track of all unique game titles or something like that. That's what I'm going to go with the simpler solution here, and I'm going to create another array, game titles. And I'm going to keep, this is going to be used to keep track to see whether or not I've seen this game before. Right? So after I've got a game title, I'm going to go ahead and put that into this array. But I don't want to put it in there if it already exists. So once again, I'm going to go back to my my old friend Google here, and I'm going to ask PHP element exists. How do we test whether or not an element exists in an array? Stack Overflow, good. Should be array value or contains. PHP array contains, I think. Yeah, here we go, in array. So you can check to see whether or not an element is in an array, not as a key, but an actual value, using this function right here. Okay. So if it's not the case that the game title is in the game titles array, then I'll go ahead and add it. How do we add elements? Well, we could go through and find the next available index value that hasn't been used. Otherwise, in PHP, you can use the following syntax. Game titles, you don't provide an index, and you simply set it equal to game title. The 50-cent word here, that's called elision. That you can by not providing an index value here, it'll place it in the next available index that it thinks it should be. So, for example, if there are 5 elements in there already, then the next available index would be 5, and it would put it at index 5. Okay, just to make sure that this works, again, let's go ahead and print our game titles. All right, and run that. And here are all the game titles, and you'll see that they're all unique here. The Lego Star Wars only appears once in this entire thing. Right? We're also getting that empty string there because there were some entries in that data file that did not have a game title. So we could add additional logic there to check to see whether or not it's empty. Just a second. Okay. So again, we could add a bunch of checks there to see whether or not the game title is empty. and not put it into the array. In fact, let's go ahead and do that. If it's not already in the array and the game title is not empty, then we'll go ahead and put it in. Now, when I run this again, we're not going to get that blank game title here. Right? So how can we use this to fix it so that LucasArts only has free published games? Well, what we could do is, if the game title is not empty, and we've not already seen this game. If we've already seen this game, then we don't want to increment the game counter. So in fact, I'm just going to go ahead and grab this. So the logic here is, if the publisher already exists in our array, and we've not seen this game before, actually, sorry, we're not going to be able to do this. Let's see, because at this point, it does exist in the array. We want to know if this is the first time that we've seen this. So since it's the exact same logic as above, what we can do is we can go ahead and get rid of this up here. And then since this is the first time we've seen the game, we'll go ahead and increment the counter. And then to make sure that we never hit this again, this is where we'll go ahead and put the game in there. Okay. And then we'll go ahead and cut and paste the logic from up there as well. And assuming that the game title exists, we'll go ahead and put it in there. Okay, let's run that again. And now LucasArts has the correct number. Let's just go ahead and do a really quick spot check here. Let's see. Against some others. That output there is not guaranteed to be correct, but let's just go ahead and spot check. Namco should be 1, that's correct. Valve should be 2, that's correct. I'm somewhat convinced now that that it works. There is an anomaly down here. There seems to be a record with no publisher, and they haven't published anything. So we would probably want to go back and add logic there to ignore any non-existent publisher. For now, though, let me go ahead and get rid of this debugging stuff. And we'll ignore the fact of this. That's a pretty easy fix that anybody could do. But what I want to do now is, it's not in the right order. All right, we wanted this to be sorted with respect to the publishers' names. So I'm going to show you how to do that now. ARR, all the keys are in there. So what we will actually want to do is we want to create a new array here. So publishers is equal to I think it's array keys of ARR. Let's just make sure. Let's do a Google search for array keys. And what this does is, given an array, it might have a bunch of keys that are in that array. In this case, it's going to be the publisher names. So by calling this, it'll give us a new array where those keys are actually the values. Right? To show you that this works, printf, or let's go ahead and print r publishers. Right? Oops. Publishers, excuse me. There we go. And you see that that the publisher names here, which were keys before, are now values. And I did it like this because what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to use the built-in sorting features. Sort publishers. Right? Now let's print it again to see that it's actually sorted. Atari, Blizzard Entertainment, Capcom, Delphi, etc., all the way down to Valve. And of course, we still have that empty string there, but again, you can take care of that yourself. All right? How does this help us? I'm going to change this for each loop to instead iterate over the new sorted publishers array. Now the keys at this point are going to be the indices, and the values will be the publishers. So we're going to have to change this print statement here. We still want to print the publishers' names, which will be the value. But now we also want to print the number of games published by that publisher. And to do that, we're going to have to reference our original ARR array here. ARR sub val. Right? The value is being used as the key in that array, and so we're getting that value right there. Now we have nearly a virtually identical output here for this part. Atari, Blizzard Entertainment 0, Capcom 3, Delphi Software 1, etc., all the way down to Valve of 2. Looks like Ubisoft is being miscounted. I think that was an intentional mistake, or I forget what the data file held. Okay. All right, let me go ahead and check. Are there any questions so far before we do this in Java? And once we do it in Java, I'll open it up to questions and then end it, since we are at noon here. All right, not seeing any. Everyone still here? Even if you're not, I'm still going to do it in Java because I think that this is recording, and you can always come back to it later if you want to. All right. Excellent. Okay. That's why it's always important to be on time. Okay. All right. According to one person, there were 2 Ubisofts in the original. All right. All right. So let me go ahead and open up Eclipse here. Get rid of that Half-Life. Let's see. And new class. Let's call it game report. Note the naming conventions here in Java. All of the class names should be upper camel cased. All the variables should be lower camel cased. So string file name is equal to. We're going to have to talk about how to do file IO here in Java. The easiest thing to do if you're using Eclipse is to create a folder called whatever you want. In this case, I'll call it data because that's what you're going to be doing in your projects. And then I'm going to create a new file here. And what was game data.csv say? Right. I don't want to open that up in Excel, unfortunately. Oh, it's going to do that. Open with text editor so that I can take this data right here and there. So it's important to have, I mean, you can put it anywhere on your file system if you really want to, but by putting it here, I can make everything relative to the project root. So if I wanted to open up that file, I'm going to go data, because it's in the data folder, game data.csv. Right? That's the easiest way of getting doing file IO in Eclipse in Java. Of course, this eventually can be any arbitrary file name, relative file path, or absolute file path if you really want to. All right. So the easiest way to do file input in Java is to use the scanner class. All right, and unfortunately, the scanner class does do some what are called checked exceptions that you are forced to try and catch. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to do it in one line. S is equal to new scanner, and it's going to be based on a new file on our file name up there. And I'm going to have to import stuff. Just hovering over something and clicking import will automatically import it up here for you. And catch exception B. So what this actually throws is, I believe, a file not found exception when it does this. So I could be more specific here that it catches a file not found exception if I really wanted to, but I don't really care about any of that. In my opinion, and a lot of other people's opinion, checked exceptions in Java were a mistake. There are very few other languages that actually support checked exceptions. Checked exceptions are ones that you have to try and catch. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to simply rethrow it. Throw a new exception, runtime exception, wrapping E, the caught exception here in that. So what that's basically going to do is I'm forced to catch it because it's a runtime exception, but I'm choosing to rethrow it as a runtime exception. Or sorry, I'm forced to catch it because it's a checked exception, and I'm rethrowing it as an unchecked exception. Okay. Don't worry about the wordings here. S is never closed. All right, fine. Later on, we'll go S dot close. That might also result in no, there's no checked exceptions thrown from that. All right. The scanner class is a really easy way of doing file input or standard input if you really want to, but it has a lot of nice methods that you can rely on. For example, s.has next. Right, that returns true or false depending on whether or not there's more stuff coming from that file. So while s.has next, I'll continue processing that file. I want to get a line, so s.next line will do that for me. String line is equal to. That's very, very similar to this is a file open, for close down here, and in between we use a bunch of forget statements. In this case, though, it's just next line. And I believe, let's go ahead and read the documentation here. But oops, come on. That it returns the line that was skipped. In other words, I'm trying to read whether excluding any line separator at the end. So in PHP, we had to trim out that end line character. Here in Java, we're not going to have to do that. Just to prove to you that this works, system.out.println line. ln is going to restore that end line character, so we should see what the file looks like now. And we do. Okay. Well, I want to process that line just like I did in PHP. There is a nice way of doing that using split. I can split along commas. That returns an array of strings. I'll call them tokens. And then I could run the debugger to show you that this is actually working. But let's just go ahead and grab out. All we're really interested in is the game title and the publisher at this point. So string game title is equal to tokens sub 0, and string publisher is equal to tokens sub 1. So game title separated by a comma, space, publisher. And let's see if that actually works. Yep, and in some cases, the game is empty. So we need to implement logic similar to before. Instead of an associative array, though, I'm going to come back up here, and I'm going to establish what's called a data structure called a map. Right? And I want to map a publisher to a count of the number of games, right? So I'm mapping a string value to an integer value. Right? and I'll call this map pub count, and I'll set it equal to a new hash map of the same mapping. A string is going to map to an integer. This is a really nice data structure because it's kind of like what we did in PHP with an associative array, but it's even more powerful because here you're not stuck with just integers and strings as your key values. You can use any object mapping to any type of object. So I could, have a reverse map, an integer to string that represented the reverse map of this, if it made sense. So how do I tell whether or not the publisher, which is going to be the key value in this map, has already been encountered before? What I could do is I could go pubcount.get publisher. What that'll do is that'll return the integer value here if publisher is a valid key. There are other ways of doing this. I think it's has key, or nope, dot key. I forget how, you'd have to look through it yourself, but this is a very easy way of doing it. Let's just try to get the integer n, let's say, out of that hash map. Now, if that key value pair does not exist, it'll return null. So I can check for that. If n is equal to null, oops, it's all lowercase in Java. Then that means that this is the first time that we've seen this publisher. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go pubcount.put. This is how we put things into the hash map. The publisher will map to let's say 0 for now. All right. If it is not null, then that means that it's in there. And so what we could do is we could take an increment n and then put it back in. But I'm going to simplify all of that. All right. So if n is null, then this is the first time that we've seen the publisher. So I'm going to set n equal to 1 because presumably we have one game here. And then I'm going to take that if else, which I would be doing this anyway, and put in n. Right? The else statement here will be n++. Non-null, say that we've seen 3 games so far by the same publisher. So we'll increment it. Now we've seen the 4th game, and then we'll put it back into the map. Right? We're going to have the same problems as before, depending on empty game titles and empty publishers. But for now, let's go ahead and go with that and see what it looks like when we print it out. I could go, system.out.println that pub count and run it and see what it looks like. I get results. Blizzard Entertainment 1, Rockstar Games 5, LucasArts 6. I'm having that same problem as before, but that doesn't look very good. So how do I iterate over elements in a map, right? What I could do is I could use a this is an enhanced for loop. It's kind of like a for each loop in Java, but it uses the same syntax as a for loop. I want to iterate over each key, right? Each key is a string. So for string publisher in the publisher.keyset, sorry, pubcount.keyset, right? I'm going to system.out.print. Let's go ahead and use printf here to show you that you can do it in Java too. %s, and remember that we went with -35, I believe, to make it formatted, and then %d. And what we're going to print here is the publisher, and then now we need the publisher count here. Right? So pubcount.get publisher. That returns that integer that it's being mapped to. So let's go ahead and go with int n is equal to this. I'm just saving it in a variable. Of course, you could have done all of this in one line. And let's see what that looks like now. Oops, forgot my inline character. There we go. It looks very similar as before. But remember, it looped 3 unique games. So I need to know whether or not a game, I've encountered a game for the first time. And for that, I'm going to use a different data structure called a set. A set is different from a list in that it only holds unique values. So now it's going to be even much easier than PHP because now I don't need to see whether or not it contains it already. If I added Ubisoft twice to this set of games, it would have no effect. It would still only be in there once. Right? So now let's think about the logic here. I've got the game title. Here, this is the first time I've seen the publisher, right? And then this one is we've seen the publisher before, right? So now I need to determine whether or not that game is valid, right? Because if it's not valid, I should set it to 0 instead, right? So if game title, let's see, game title dot is empty. That's a way that you can test to see if a game title is empty. So if it's empty, then I should set my n equal to 0 because I've seen the publisher for the first time. I want to keep track of it, but they've published 0 games. Otherwise, I'll set my n equal to 1. Right? Likewise here, we've seen the publisher before, but we should only increment it if it's been if the game title is not empty. And we don't need an else because n is the previous value. So if the game title is not empty, it is empty. Oops. If the game title is not empty, then we should increment it. If the game title is empty, then we don't need to do anything. We can retain the old value of n. Okay. Let's run this. And a lot more of them are more correct now. Sega has published no games. I can open this up with our text editor here and see that Sega, the only entry here has no entries. Good question. I'm not up on Python that well, but there are sets, dictionaries and such. So a map is more like a dictionary if you're familiar with that in Python. A set is like a set in they're the same concept, I believe, in Python. Another question over here: is it possible to have a map set as in a map that only holds unique keys? In fact, that's what a map does. You can't. You would have a multi-map if you had multiple keys mapping to the same thing, or if you had duplicate keys. I don't believe that that's possible in Java and vanilla Java. There are plenty of libraries out there that have multi-maps and stuff like that, but otherwise, in a map, a key is unique. So you would not be able to have 2 keys, the same thing as Sega in that hash map. Good questions. And keep them coming if you have them. I need to plug back in. There we go. All right, so the last thing that we're going to do here is we're going to fix this issue with LucasArts. We need to see whether or not the game has been encountered before. So if it's empty, we're not going to do anything. Who cares? Otherwise, if it's not empty, we need to see whether or not we've encountered this game before. And I used games up here, right? So if games.contains the game title, right, then that means that we've seen it before. And if we've seen it before, we don't actually, we don't need to do really anything here, do we? That would imply that the game had 2 entries, one of them with a publisher and one of them without the publisher. So I don't think we need to do it here. I think we need to do it down here. We've seen the publisher before, so we need to check. Have we seen the game before? We've seen the game before. Do nothing. Right? Else, we've not seen the game before. We've actually we need to increment n here. Right? And we'll come back and clean up this logic here in a second. Let's just see that it works, at least for LucasArts. Oh, okay. So So we've seen the game before, do nothing. So we increment n, and then what we need to do is we need to add it. Games.add game title. There we go. And that should work now. LucasArts has 4. There might be a cut and paste error here. Find 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I'm willing to bet. Oh, I guess we might need some logic up here then. So if this is the first time we've seen the game, then we need to go games.add game title. There we go. I think that's why we were off by 1, I believe. Yep. There we go. Very similar logic to what we had in PHP, but now it's all correct. Again, what I'm using here, games, is a set that contains all the game titles that we've seen up to this point. And so if we've seen the game before, we do nothing. Otherwise, if this is the first time that we've seen the game, then we need to increment our counter and add it. I could really simplify this by having a not up here and then moving my code up here, and then I don't need that else statement. But I'm going to leave it like this just so that somebody can follow along with the code. We've seen the game before, do nothing. This is the first time we've seen the game. So we add 1 to the counter and add the game title to our set so that we know we've seen it at least once. Right? Okay. And again, that's really only half the exercise. Actually, one last thing we need to do is like we did in PHP. We need to sort these things. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new list of strings, and these are publishers, equals to new array list of strings. Let me go ahead and import these things. A list is basically kind of like it's a dynamic array. It can hold duplicate. It's not a set. It can hold duplicates. Lists are ordered. You would not be able to sort a set because a set is inherently unordered, but you would be able to sort a list. I'm going to create a new array list that holds strings. And what I'm going to do is, this is called a copy constructor. I'm going to go ahead and get the key set from my pub count map, and that's going to be my new array list. Just to show you that this works, I'll go ahead and go system.out.println publishers, and we'll see what that looks like. There's all the publishers are printed in a comma separated value format, but that's not what I want to do. I want to sort them. So collections.sort publishers. It knows how to sort strings. It's called a natural ordering. It'll naturally order it in alphanumeric order, so that Atari is first, and I don't know who'd be last, but Sony Entertainment would be close to last. And once we've sorted it, then I can show you again that let's see. Let me back up here. Oops. Okay. Let me just go ahead and come on. Let's just go ahead and do it. I've sorted it. So instead of iterating over the publishers in the key set, I'm going to iterate over the publishers in this new list. And now that will enforce the ordering that this sorting resulted in. Atari, Blizzard, Capcom, etc., all the way down to Valve. So Valve is last. And that looks remarkably similar to our output, I think. Let's see. Nintendo should have 5, and it does over here. So again, that's really, in both of the languages, that was really only half the story. The other half of the story was to do something very similar, but for games mapping to the number of platforms that they're on. But all it is a simple adaptation of what we just did. All right? Lots of new stuff here that we've not covered in class yet, but that was kind of the point of this. Since we don't have class today, just do some exercises instead. When we come back on Thursday, or if this is for the 150, the main section, when we come back on Thursday, we'll do a review a really quick review of string of a list, or sorry, of loops and conditionals. Then we'll jump into strings and arrays. Hopefully, we can get to the more interesting stuff on Thursday as well. Hopefully, a lot of people showed up to this. I'm not able to see a count of the number of views just yet. I do believe that the video will remain available once I'm done broadcasting here. So if you want to, you can come back. And after I go ahead and stop the broadcast, I'll go ahead and post all of the code that we just did up to Piazza. So again, since we are on like a 10-second delay here, I'll go ahead and ask, are there any last questions before we end the broadcast? And I'll have to wait 10 seconds here to see if there's any response, because again, there's about a 5 to 10-second delay. Again, I'll put all the source code on GitHub as soon as we are done here. Any last questions? So the first one, wondering if you had any suggestions for blackout math. It's going to be really simple to iterate over blacking out those individual characters. Otherwise, what I would do is I would suggest that you write a function that, given a string with a bunch of numbers and operators in it, operates left to right and parses out each one of those numbers. And then when it hits an operator, the number that you've gotten so far, along with the total, you would check. There's only 4 possibilities: plus, minus, multiplication, and division. So I would start with maybe a function that parsed out a string containing an equation like that. Then once you've got that, it's really easy to simply iterate over all pairs of blacked out characters, pass each one of those into the string, your function that you wrote, and then see whether or not they're equal. As for the bonus part, a recursive solution would probably be the best, since you'd have to go with an order of operator precedence there. The second question here: do we need a loop to print out the array list, or is it just repetitive? You can. So let's go ahead and print an array list with a traditional for loop. You could go for int I equals 0, I is less than publishers dot size, I plus plus, I plus plus, and then you can go system dot out dot println publishers dot get I. Right? So that's one way that you can do it. Otherwise, you can do it with an enhanced for loop like I did up here. This is an enhanced for loop, which is basically a for each loop. Right? So you could do it either way. I'll leave that code in there so that you can see it when I post it. Another one, as far as the utilities to help us parse through the string. No, I don't believe that either language would have something built in to do that. PHP is going to have, like we discussed on Piazza a couple times ago, PHP does have an eval function, but that will only evaluate it for the actual order of precedence. So it'll help you on your bonus if you're going to do that, but it will not help you with your main thing. And that was kind of the point of the exercise, is that you write a parsing loop somehow, a parsing loop function that would be able to parse out left to right a string like that. All right. See no more further questions. I'm going to go ahead and end the broadcast now at 90 minutes anyway. Again, it should be archived and available at the same link, I believe. But otherwise, I'll go ahead and post the rest of this stuff to Piazza. All right. Thanks for coming.